Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. As always, I hope you are doing well. Before we get to today's show, I wanted to bring up an important announcement. We are currently hiring a digital content and social media manager for Aham Yoga and Let's Talk Yoga. So, if this is something you have experience in and interest in, or you know someone who is suitable for this role, then please pass on this opportunity to someone who you think will be a good fit. This position is remote and you can work from anywhere in the globe. It is part time, and all the details are in the link that I have shared in the description of this podcast. So, again, we are looking to hire a social media and digital content manager for Aham Yoga as well as Let's Talk Yoga. On the show today, I have Stephanie Tencer, who is a founding teacher and owner of Studio Po, which is a Toronto based Iyengar yoga studio. She's been teaching since 2011 and is known for providing accessible and personalized Iyengar yoga instruction. But her compassionate yet empowering teaching style helps anyone facing health challenges or new students, experienced practitioners, or aspiring teachers build strength, confidence, and resilience through the practice of yoga. I discovered Stephanie when I was on YouTube looking for some Iyengar yoga classes. Now, this is not an Iyengar yoga episode, but I have a considerable amount of experience in Iyengar yoga classes, especially when I lived in India. And it was one of my main styles of practice many years ago. And I still am drawn to the depth and richness of Iyengar yoga. And occasionally, I still find myself wanting to be in the presence of Iyengar yoga teachers and really drawing from their expertise. So I was practicing some of Stephanie's online YouTube classes, and I thought that it would be a wonderful idea to bring her on the show and to have an honest conversation about how to use props as a yoga teacher. So we cover a lot of ground in today's episode. We talk about the different props and their roles and what their main purpose is. We talk about some of the ways to approach sequencing, especially when you have little to no experience, and the importance and value of some of these props. And just we go back and forth about a whole bunch of things, including how props do not always mean they make a pose easier. In fact, sometimes props will help you do things like inversions and back bends. And we do go in and out of this prop conversation. There is so much to explore, and Stephanie does a great job of keeping us on track to understand props. So I hope you, as a yoga teacher, will find this conversation valuable and insightful. There is a discount code that Stephanie has shared for her online membership, her on demand services. I will share that at the end of today's episode. So if you are intrigued and you want to learn more about how to use props in a certain capacity, then make sure you check that out at the end of today's episode. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please remember that the only way you can support this podcast is through your ratings and reviews. So please leave us a rating, a review, or share this with at least one other person who you think will benefit from this conversation. I will see you on the other side. Hi, Stephanie. Welcome to the Let's Talk Yoga podcast.
Hi there. Hi there. It's so great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, I'm excited. Just as I was telling you a moment ago before we started recording, I have been watching your YouTube channel and I get my morning practice done that way. I also enjoy seeing your dog on YouTube. I think I go to those YouTubers who have a dog on their yoga mat. But you and I are going to talk about props and how to use props, or even understand how to use props in a deeper way. And so many yoga teachers, depending on what background of training they've had, how they've studied, how they've practiced, and what teachers they've been exposed to, they may have some skill with props, no skill with props, or a lot of skill with props. So I'm hoping that we can help all the listeners understand the beauty and depth and the richness that props can add to practice. So, to kick things off, what are some of the things a yoga teacher who's, say, from a vinyasa background or who hasn't really used props, they see them on the studio, in the side, in the prop shelves, but they don't really know how to use them? Where would one start?
I think that the first thing is really understanding why props are used. So the most common understanding, and in some sense it's almost a misconception because it's only a small portion of how props are used, is to think of it as a way to make a pose easier or to make a pose even more accessible, that sort of thing. But in the rhetoric, so to speak, around that, it makes practicing with props almost feel less than. Like if you don't need it, then why would, don't use it kind of thing. And that's a bit misleading. So there are a number of different reasons to use a prop. One, yes, would be to make a pose more accessible. So for example, maybe you have an underlying condition, you have back pain, or let's say you have back pain, you're doing Urdhva Mukha Svanasana and it doesn't feel good in your lower back. Maybe you would put bricks underneath your hands and raise it up, or even put your hands on a chair and do Urdhva Mukha Svanasana that way. And then the pose is now available to you and you can do the work and you're not hurting yourself. And this is a great application of the prop.
Mhm.
Another application of the prop is really just to accommodate for variability. So forget an underlying condition, but some people have long torsos, some people have longer legs, and so you can raise the floor by putting a brick there, or you can make your arms longer by using a strap, these kinds of things. My favorite way to use a prop, and this is where I think it gets really exciting, but it is a skill, it is an art to sort of figure out how to do this, is when you use props to teach, to teach you a lesson, to highlight an action, and from the prop, you receive feedback. So the simple example would be standing in Tadasana. When you stand in Tadasana, the floor is your prop. Okay, right? Very basic. Floor is your prop. Can you pay attention to how the feet are touching? Are you leaning a little more on your toes? Are you leaning a little more on your heel? Does the right foot touch as much as the left? And you wouldn't be able to feel that if there wasn't contact with the floor. Like that's what's going to highlight that for you.
Mhm.
So in the same way, in the other asanas, you can use props similarly.
Mhm.
And then you can deconstruct poses and kind of just focus on a particular action and really kind of dig down deep and get super creative, which I can feel in my voice is already getting me excited. But yes, it is very much about creativity and learning and kind of revealing different layers. Yeah. And one thing, this is also something I would love for people who are just getting started with props to understand, is that using props, I would say more often than not, is an advanced practice. Because, and I see it in my classes, when a presentation of a pose is too fussy with props, like it takes skill to know how to fold the blanket properly so that it does what you want it to do. You have too many things. It's overwhelming. It's cumbersome. You need skill with it. And then it's very insightful. But in the beginning, it may not be the right place to go. So again, this conception that it's for beginners or people who can't do, it's just small part. There's so much more.
Yes, no, and I'm glad you went there right at the start, because there is that misunderstanding that if you can't do a pose, you need props.
Yeah.
And I don't think that exists in the real world. You use a prop just to take out some of the exertion. If your hamstring is tight and you're doing Supta Pada Angushtasana and you're trying to bend your knee and grab some part of your toe, a strap will just change the game on that one, and it will actually speed up your progress in the long run and make it more enjoyable. But there's something there were so many things you mentioned, but one thing I want to go back to, because I don't think it is said often enough and highlighted, and it's the first time I remember this happened to me was in an Iyengar yoga class. The first time I walked in, and that was body proportions. So many yoga teachers and teachers for a long time don't recognize that somebody has long limbs and a shorter spine, or someone has a long torso and shorter limbs, or someone has long legs but shorter arms for that proportion, and how these can make a pose tremendously enjoyable or just make them regret coming for a specific
Yeah.
pose that you are doing.
Yep.
So can you go into that a little more? Is there anything that you want? Even now, I'm sure there are people listening who haven't thought of, oh, these proportions matter, and why some students can never do an arm balance as effortlessly as some others with longer limbs. So, can you get into that? Is there any visual indicators, any tips, hacks that we can, as yoga teachers, lean on? Because for me, it's a very visual thing. My first Iyengar yoga teacher, for some twist, made me sit on a second blanket. And I was very new to yoga back then. And I remember thinking, that's like fail grade, But he was like short spine, long limbs. And since then, I cannot unsee it. Short spine, long limbs. And so is there any visual tips for teachers who are hearing this for the first time?
The one that comes to mind is Prasarda Padottanasana. So when you come forward, if the head is nowhere near the ground, okay, and you are able to have the student go a little wider, you'll notice that the torso will go lower. If you bring the legs a little narrower, the torso will lift up. So to me, that visual just shows the relationship between the legs and the torso. And so then you'll know, okay, is the torso short in relation to the legs, or vice versa?
Understood.
It just kind of gives you that example. So that's one that comes to mind. And then the other thing that comes to mind is just that, we are all different. And so when you look at whatever the reference is, I mean, I refer to Light on Yoga often, but Light on Yoga has no props.
Yeah.
And because Iyengar has very long limbs, which I do not. And so it's, I don't know if I want to say a starting point. I was taught that each asana, it's not just a shape, it's a situation. And so situations have context, and therefore, that's like an invitation to explore that context. Marichiasana 3, like any of the cross body types of twistings, and especially with binding, I mean, my arms I can work on it, and I can release whatever tension in the shoulders and, blockages that might be. But it's never going to be one of those poses that comes super easy, where it does for others who have longer limbs.
Yeah. And I think it is also, it's the teacher's responsibility to have these conversations openly in asana classes. Like I always joke and tell my students that my wish for you in your next life is that you are born with long limbs, because then these arm balances are just that much more easier on your body. They're more accessible. They're within reach, especially for some people who have shorter arms. And I also call out that in this pose, I have a shorter spine, so you won't see it as much. But let's pick someone with a longer torso. You will see it visually more clearly. And to also teach in a way, I always offer the props first. And then in round 2, say, okay, now some of you longer limbed people go off the block. The rest of you go back on it or stay on it. And it's also because it's how I've been taught, and how I believe everyone should practice is based on your own body needs. So I think it's a wonderful thing for teachers to pause on, especially teachers who teach other teachers, to talk about this, because it makes or breaks classes. So nobody's rolling their eyes at you in arm balances. Something I want to get to later. I'm just putting a peg there for arm balances. Something with proportions that I do is I put them in tabletop. And I show them on my body. My tabletop, my shoulders are much higher than my hips.
Oh, that's a great
Yeah.
way to look at
And
it.
and
Yeah.
then if it's a teacher training situation, then we have everyone look, and I don't tell them anything. I'm just like, just look. What do you see? What do you see? And sometimes they'll be like, nothing, nothing. But in my body, it's so evident that the shoulders are so much higher than the hips. It's a slant there on the spine. And they're like, the shoulders are higher. And I'm like, why? And then it's like, oh, wait, the arms are so long, the shoulders are higher.
Mm-hmm.
And then just tell them to even spark that thought of, oh, we have different arm lengths, different leg lengths, and to teach them to think that way versus just do the pose, I think is precious. Okay, before
One,
I sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you know, one way to practice too is to do the pose with the prop and then to do the pose without the
Yes.
prop and sort of see what the difference is and how, especially if you're not yet sure what the value of the prop is, right? And one example that comes to mind is if you're in a class with practitioners who it's within their practice to lift up into Urdhva
Yes.
Dhanurasana. So sometimes we'll put height under the hands and lift up, and other times we'll put height under the feet and lift up.
Mhm.
And inevitably, people fall into one of two camps, right? Lifting up with the height on one side versus the other is easier. And that's also going to give you a little bit of insight as to the proportions.
No, that's a very nice example because I always teach Urdhva Dhanurasana with blocks under the hands. And that's a non-negotiable. You start there. Then we move in other directions. And I just did that last night in class. So I'm so glad you brought that up. And even just the diagonal slanting blocks against the wall for the wrist. So I think it's very precious. You have to be in the room with other teachers who teach like this to really understand it. And something I notice, which is a gap, is you have to modify how you practice. And I've always said this, how you practice and how you teach need not be the same. And you might enjoy a heavy duty vinyasa style or any style practice, but your students need a softer, more deconstructed approach. And the two can be very different, and it's different skill sets. But there is value in that. You said this earlier in our conversation, and I want to go back to it. Can you talk about this concept of deconstructing a pose to reconstruct it? Because I completely understand what you're saying. And because of my little Iyengar background compared to your extensive one, what do you mean by deconstructing a pose to bring something else about?
Okay, where to start? Okay, I think I'll take an example from the class I taught this morning, actually. Okay, so we were working in my mind, and where I wanted to go is I wanted to work on Virabhadrasana 3 and challenging asana for the group. So we started with Urdhva Hastasana, okay, arms up. And we got the rotation, we got the lift. Then we worked with it. We put a strap around the forearms. And we worked this idea of hitting out against the strap as you lift the arms up and kind of feeling that engagement in the upper back. And then when you push the arms back behind the line of the ears, what happens to the the upper back? It goes in. So you kind of have this relationship. Arms back, the chest will open a little more. Then we go into Virabhadrasana 1 and the transition into Virabhadrasana 3. So inevitably, when people transition into Virabhadrasana 3, the arms get heavy and they sink down. And so I could then reference the Urdhva Hastasana work and how this is with the arms up and the arm moving back. It's the same action as Urdhva Hastasana, but it seems that much harder because of the orientation. That was my way. I hope it's clear what I'm saying, but it of just picking out the action of the shoulder blades, the armpit region, the chest action in a way where they're not worried about balance. They're not even thinking about Virabhadrasana 3 yet, but they felt it. So then when we go there, they can really kind of seek it out again.
No, and I get what you're talking about, the putting the straps and pressing out and drawing that the shoulders back and down. And I always think it is such a smart way of working. So when they're in that pose that you are considering your main pose, there's less exertion. The segments are ready and you put them all together, if
Yeah.
that makes sense. And I think that is this deconstructing to reconstruct something is such a rich sequencing concept. And to be honest, I've only seen it done in Iyengar yoga classes. Yeah, I mean, it's done in some parts here and there. Maybe my limited education, or maybe I saw it first in Iyengar yoga. Actually, I've only seen it in Iyengar yoga classes. I saw it only there. And it really changed how I approached asanas since then.
You
But
know, even when we talk about variability, human variability in the poses, I mean, the truth is the same action may just be more obvious to somebody in a certain pose versus
yes,
another pose. It could be the same action, but you just feel it. It makes more sense to you. Let's say that the buttock action in Virabhadrasana 1, it's hard to feel it, but if you were doing Urdhva Mukha Svanasana or Chatushpadasana, you might feel it more. And so to be able to like find those connections, those linkages, this is definitely a classical Iyengar yoga thing, like find the connections between the poses and then bring it back. It's like that too becomes a prop.
Mhm.
And it's a tool, right? So you have the physical, but then you can also relate it back to other asanas.
And something I have often often said out loud is more than focus more on how they will learn versus what you teach. Because so often new teachers will walk into a room saying, "This is my sequence, and I'm going to stick to it." And there is advantage to that. You're new, you are learning the ropes of how this is done. But over time, that has to evolve. You have to see who's in front of you and then adapt as needed. And that comes with a good amount of study, observation, preparation, things like that. I want to go back to props again in a little more of a simplistic understanding. So we have straps, we have blocks, which I know in the Iyengar world they call bricks, bolsters, blankets. There are chairs, which is not a common thing that you see in most yoga studios that are non-prop based. And then there is walls and windowsills and ballet bars and things like that. So let's start with the strap. What is the core function of a yoga strap?
Core function.
And you can extend that to as you want to. But if I were to explain to a beginner student, what does a strap do? What would that be?
I think it either makes your limbs longer
Mm-hmm.
or it's used as a container.
Wonderful. Yeah. I understand the container part that you're talking about. I'm thinking Paripurna Navasana, feet and torso and a bound angle and stuff like that. Okay. Limb to limb connection, like lengthen a limb as needed. Yeah. What is the function of a block?
So I'd say most commonly it is used now these days to raise the floor. Like, in standing poses, if you can't reach the floor, you can have the brick or block. I find it so funny that there are two names, but for your hands that way. But I believe, I hope my history is correct. I believe that the blocks were originally designed with Shirshasana in mind.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, for vertical brick and then like a flat wide brick. So you have the vertical more for the spine and then a little bit wider one for
Yeah.
the shoulder blades.
Mhm.
And it would help people who needed the support there be able to take the inversion.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, I didn't know. I mean, I know the brick was originally a brick, and hence it is still sometimes referred to as the brick. All right.
But it goes kind of to just the ingenuity, the creativity that BKS Iyengar had when he developed these props, because from the brick, then then he started thinking about Supta Virasana and how Supta Virasana is so challenging. The lumbar region, doesn't touch the floor and for a lot of people, and it can be painful. So then from the brick, it became a round brick. Like he had tried softer materials, which is fine if you need support. But that's the other thing about props. Like a hard support and a soft support is going to do different things, both for the nervous system and both for
True.
for how the body responds. So he needed something hard, and that's how we have like the half round brick.
What about bolsters? Again, not something you see very often because it is a hard prop to store. It just takes so much space
Yeah.
and clean. But what is the role of a bolster?
Bolster, I guess if I go for primary function, the shape of the bolster can inform the shape of the chest a lot of the times. And I'd point out that the bolster can be used both in a vertical way, which is going to have a particular response in the chest, or horizontally and provide some wide support, which will do things a little different for the body and the breath.
Something I want to talk about with bolsters here is often, I think it is a misconception that bolsters are something you lie on all the time. I remember using bolsters for arm balances, and so many arm balances became an option because there was a bolster under you in different setups. And something one of our substitute teachers in the studio I used to go to, she would always make us sit on the ground, take the bolster, hold it up over our head in Sukhasana, cross legs, and make us stand up. And then walk to the end of the room, come back, sit down, switch the cross of the legs, and then go back up again. And it was just added progressive load on your body. And so many different Navasana type of variations. You'd sit in Navasana or Ardha Navasana with knees bent, and they would put a bolster on your shin bones. And it could be blankets and it could be, but it was to add that weight on you. And I always tell people, when I say bring a bolster, don't think I'm asking you to do Shavasana with it. We could, if that's the day you're having, but there is such an intricate and fun usage of these props. And it went back to what I said earlier, creativity lies at the center of it. And I do think it comes with experience and exposure to be able to think like that.
Sometimes I tell students if I need them to go get a bolster, I'll tell them to go get a bolster, but don't get too excited.
No, it's always about setting expectations. What about a blanket?
Blankets? I mean, they're used so many different ways because they're rolled, they're folded. I think Iyengar yoga practitioners often get teased for our intense specificity with regards to how we fold blankets. But each blanket fold is for a particular purpose and can be a certain thickness. So blankets can fill spaces. Blankets can create height. It can create softness.
It's a cushion in so many poses.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can be used very intelligently. A fussy prop though, but if you know how to use it, it will not take you too long. I always believe the teacher doesn't act like the props are a big deal. The students will also not act like the props are a big deal. They'll be quick with it. They'll be swift with it. If you make it elaborate, they will make it even more elaborate.
Yeah.
Can we talk about a chair? Because in something I noticed when I moved to America was chair yoga meant yoga for seniors, or, something that you do if you are dealing with certain things in your body. My exposure to chair yoga until that point was Sarvangasana and all these combinations. And in fact, one of my Iyengar yoga teachers, he's written a book about chair yoga, and it is all about arm balances, inversions, upside down in some capacity, and taking every ordinary pose into this very complex, intricate version of it. And nothing about being on a chair was easy from my previous experience. And then I came here And chair meant something you sit on and do all your poses. And there is tremendous value and need for that. But I always tell people, look at the person in front of you. The chair should be used based on how they need the chair to be used. So, can you talk about how the chair can enhance practice? Because I think people know how to do chair yoga in terms of the adaptable versions of it. But can you talk about the other side?
Yeah. So supported inversions and supported back bending with a chair is it's like a gateway into a whole other
Mm,
realm of practice.
mhm,
You know, in Iyengar yoga, we have some fancy wooden props like a back
mhm,
bender,
mhm,
but you know, not people don't have access to that all the
mhm.
time, and there are a variety of different wooden props that are just not everyone has access to. The chair has become quite versatile. It can be used with so many different creative setups to be able to more or less replicate how these very specialized props are
Mhm,
used.
mhm.
And so if you can invest in a chair and have that as part of your sort of home yoga toolkit, so to speak, then you're able to go there. So
Mhm,
Viparita Dandasana over the chair, Urdhva Dhanurasana over the chair.
mhm.
And when you find the setups, you make the chair work for you, you then can stay in the asana for so much
Yes.
longer.
Yes.
And it changes the experience. I mean, it's not about the muscularity of the pose. You can start to see what happens to the breath and the mind, and it's just very different.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and it makes so much sense. Have you seen that? What is it called? Headstander. Do you know
Okay.
what I'm talking about?
Mhm.
That little
Like,
bench
yeah.
stool with the space for the head and neck.
Yeah.
And we've done that in Iyengar yoga classes with two chairs.
Yeah.
You put your head in and takes the weight off the pressure. It's one of the most, I think, the one of the most fun ways to do a headstand.
Mhm.
Uh, you got to still have control and awareness and all of that. But I saw that prop and I was like, wait a minute, it's just a ripoff of what two chairs used to do. So it's, I think sometimes also we we just in modern day the way we practice, we don't have exposure to teachers who teach like that. And I
Yeah.
think that is because we think it's a go 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 format. We sometimes lose patience with that, and it's hard to have chairs in every studio. The loud, noisy chairs. I remember when my Iyengar teacher used to say, "Go bring the chairs." A part of me would roll my eyes because it's just so loud. But jokes apart, can we talk about the use of a wall?
Yes. I have a favorite quote. I mean, it was repeated to me so many times in my yoga history, my growing up in yoga, but apparently because Iyengar is quoted as saying, there's an article where he says, "The wall is my guru,"
Mm,
and and he he did. So it was about doing standing poses
mm,
at the wall, and you can use the wall with the wall behind you and have the reference of the touch. You can use the wall facing the wall. So if you think about lateral standing poses, you would be
mhm,
the whole front body facing the wall. And that's going to create a very different experience for you.
mhm.
He also did standing poses lying down. So again, these are, just different orientations. Last March, I was in India at the institute, and it was very, very hot. And when it's very hot, you're going to modify your practice a little bit and in different ways. And standing poses are very
Eating.
strong.
Yeah.
It can be heating. So it was fascinating. We did our standing poses facing the wall, and we put the forehead
Mm,
on the wall. And the instruction was to find the forward bending quality
mm.
to these standing poses. And it changed the experience of the standing
Oh, I
poses
bet.
dramatically. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm,
Just as an example.
mhm,
I used to do my standing poses with my back body to the wall.
Mhm.
And so I was working a lot on some spinal issues and just like the action of the leg bone into the hip socket. If I could feel which buttock was going back and which buttock was moving forward, the wall kind of helped me gauge that a little bit. So that was important feedback and was helpful. I also know sometimes, like if you're menstruating or for
Mhm.
different women's issues, if you do it again facing the wall, not you don't necessarily have to put your head on the wall, but just even the hands, it can be nice and stable. That's one thing. But I find you can also get more lift to the organic body in
Mhm.
that direction. So it's like it's so similar, but it's different.
Mhm.
Just facing the wall or back body to the wall.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's like it's amazing.
Yeah, and
Just
there's so much.
figure this stuff out. Yeah.
Yes, and there is so much. And I also believe as a student, you have to have qualities of patience and perseverance when you learn things like this, because you will pick up so many. I've learned so much in in those settings just by observing what somebody else was doing. What I
Mhm.
was doing was a very different setup, but what somebody else was doing, and being able to learn like that versus this is the only way you get in and out, and you say a bunch of things and you move them to the next pose. There is value in, there are
Yep.
upsides to everything, but
Just to expand on that, the props themselves is one thing.
Mhm.
Like learning how to use a prop. Okay, so if I want to teach Urdhva Dhanurasana, what's a setup? What's a chair setup? How does it go? That's kind of stage one in terms of learning how to incorporate props. But the more important thing is to understand what the prop is doing,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
then you realize, okay, is it a stack of blankets or is it a bolster? It doesn't really matter because the point is just to raise to
Yeah.
get more height or
Yes.
and then the creativity is just like off the charts
Mhm.
because then you're really looking, you're really understanding and
Mhm.
you're responding. And
Mhm.
that i- if you don't have the exact brick, the exact blanket, it doesn't matter.
Doesn't
It's
matter.
okay.
Yeah, no, I like how you said it is really understanding, looking and responding. And something I think that is so undervalued is you observe, like in my earlier days of teaching, I would always look at why a student is stuck,
Yep.
why they couldn't do a specific thing I was asking them to do, but I could. And when I go back next class, this was in my earlier days, I was like, I'm going to move them further. And what did that mean? Honestly, sometimes it meant putting a block under their hands.
Eh,
Sometimes it meant my entire sequence was just so bad that it needed a redo. But to really get out of your head and into the student's practice,
Yeah.
and something I think teachers really need to do, or anyone needs to do, is practice with props themselves. So if you're doing Urdhva Dhanurasana, I always tell people, if you are saying, no, I'm not going to ever try it with blocks under my hands, then you are doing your students a disservice. Because 7 out of 10 students sometimes will need blocks under their hands in their learning phase. Then it depends on a few other things. But to really be like, okay, I've done Dhanurasana without props. I'll do Dhanurasana with props. What does that even mean? I've done full wheel with props, without props. You should have experience of both. And what you offer will depend on who's in front of you. But it's very hard if you've only studied with teachers who've never touched a prop.
Yeah.
And that was the whole inspiration behind having you here, was to shed some light on it. I mean, I can ask you so much more about props, but I want to be mindful of time. Can you tell everyone how they can access your, you have YouTube, you also have an online library and live classes and a few other things. So where can they connect with you, Stephanie?
Oh, thank you. Well, you can go to the website. I have a local studio, Studio Po, and the website is studiopoyoga.com. And from there, you'll find information about the on demand membership and the regular studio membership and YouTube. Yeah, go to YouTube, search for my name, and there's lots of good stuff there.
Mhm, mhm. Wonderful. And you are not active on Instagram, correct? You're
I have an active account, but I'm not on there a lot in terms of like direct messages and stuff like
Got it.
that. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, wonderful. I will make sure to link to everything. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. The code for Stephanie's on demand services is called Let's Talk Yoga. So, if this is something of interest and of value to you, then make sure you go check that out. The link to everything about Stephanie, her on demand library, all of that, including the social media manager job opening that we have, is in the link below. As always, enjoy your practice. I will see you next week with another conversation, another guest. Until then, take care. Bye bye.